are you? Nice to see you tonight. I won't launch into my answering questions until I'm sure that enough people have joined so you don't miss it if you've asked questions. Good old turnaround by creepy chaps in the government. Yep, they're not going to force the mandate, are they? I wonder why, with them all being off with COVID, even though they're all triple jab times a billion. I mean, it's just stupid now, isn't it? Do you know, honestly, for all of you out there, I know that some of you have had every jab that's under the sun. I know that some of you are vehemently against it, and I don't care where anybody is on that spectrum. Have them all, have none. Because personal autonomy is all about choice, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure if it was the plague and people were just literally dropping dead in the streets, we'd all be queuing up, wouldn't we? We'd be like, here, have it now, immediately. Give me a drip with it all in. Of course, because there's an incremental understanding in life about what we need and what we don't need. But I think we have to all agree that we are done now with people suggesting that people have power over our bodies. And I say that for lots of reasons, guys. Lots of people misinterpret my position on vaccines. Like I said, I don't really care about what anybody else wants to do with their body, or in fact with their own kids' bodies and things like that. Some people didn't choose to have their children MMR'd. I chose to do that with my kids. I don't judge some other random person. I'm like, oh, you're a terrible mother for not doing what I... My mother didn't jab me because I don't even think it was around at the time. I had measles and mumps and, you know, that was fine. I was fine, like most people are when they get COVID. But the difference is when I gave my kids the MMR, I kind of knew that that would mean that they wouldn't end up with measles and mumps and rubella. Simple as that. And so the point of my conversation tonight is to understand my perspective and point of view, because you know, if you do a quick Google search of me these days, I mean, there'll be things like she's bonkers, which we all know is accurate. But there are also things that are inaccurate, such as calling me an anti-vaxxer, whatever that person is. I don't even know what that is. I mean, that just seems to me like somebody who makes choices that are different and distinct from your own. I don't think that should be something that people are aggressively attacked for. It's completely down to personal choice. It might almost see in other things suggesting that I'm kind of like anti-lockdown. I was anti-lockdown. I am anti-lockdown because it does immeasurable harm to our society and to mental health. But there are lots of things that are misinformed out there. And when it comes down to the reality and ration for my views and my feelings around this whole situation, it comes down to one thing. All we are our mind. Like our body is secondary. Ask anybody who's got depression or anxiety or is dealing with a whole heap of issues that are physical but then manifest themselves as well mentally, because what we think and what we feel is our experience. So if I think something and feel something, then I become that. And there has been so little vision around what we're going to do to mental health during the initial lockdown and onwards, through measures, through inciting fear in our communities. And then finally, the biggest insult, and the reason I've been so vocal on social media, and the reason I'm saying this tonight, is I am absolutely vocal and vehemently against anybody telling me as a woman, and I'm sure men feel the same, but I can only comment as a woman, because you may marginally note I am one. But the reality for that is that I know what my body is about. It is no right for anybody else to violate me in any way, shape or form. No one has a right to lay their hands within any distance of me unless I say that's acceptable. And suffragettes fought for that. They fought for rights as women. Lots of men fought for that. You know, very good men, the majority of whom, males in the UK, would also fight for similar things for women. But the reality is that we only got real control over our bodies when we started to get things like birth control. And even that's imperfect. Even that involves women having to take bloody hormone things that aren't necessarily great for us so that we can control our bodies down that way. But we choose to do it. That's it. The idea that any government minister, mostly male as well, thinks it's acceptable to suggest that anybody, man, woman or child, should have no autonomy over their body is reprehensible, inexcusable, unforgivable, and not something that's ever been seen in a free society. The same as crazy lady in New Zealand who believes that you can get your freedom if you have a COVID pass for 6 months and your boosters, meaning that there is no freedom whatsoever, because freedom isn't something that you need to buy through doing something that you might not feel free doing. It is complete hypocritical, and that's why I'm so against it. So my position tonight is it's really great that we've got the government backtracking on mandates. It's not enough though. Until those individuals who are meant to be here to serve us in our society, in our community, i.e. MPs and all those involved in that area, until they realise that serving us is not dictating what we choose to do as decent human beings with our bodies, and that particularly no man, with respect guys, I know that there'll be a lot of men listening, and you know that my view on men is that they're all pretty much wonderful, but when it comes down to, we're talking about government ministers making decisions over people's bodies, it's completely inappropriate. So I thought I'd start with that because I am getting very tired of having to defend a position that I think has been very clear from the outset, which is, you come within a foot of my body and I don't invite you, then you better duck. You better duck or run. Simple as that. And I'm sure that that's going to be represented by a lot of people out there, including the very brave people who've stood up and said no, in spite of the idea that they would lose their jobs. They are brave, brave people. And remember, 3.5% of the community is all it takes to say no. If 3.5% of people peacefully resist anything, it falls, it fails. And that's what you're seeing right now. But mental health has been absolutely ignored for 2 years now, and I'm just a little bit exhausted of COVID zealots telling us that we should take a back seat because, you know, you might get something that could make you ill, which is awful when people die of things that could make you ill. Of course it is. But realistically, we know that suicides, we know that drug dependency, we know that self-harm, we know that children's developmental issues, we know that people in general are not feeling good. And so there's been a global cost to this, as opposed to it being directed, sheltered protection of those requiring it. Has become something far bigger and far more destructive than it was meant to essentially protect, as far as I'm concerned. That off my chest. Don't know whether you can see my top, by the way, but it spells weird at the bottom wrong. Don't know whether you can see it. Can you see it, Pete? Weird. I didn't make this top, but apparently it's got these little slogans on, and then it's got stay weird, but it's spelt wrong. It's Wild Fox as well, which is quite a good make. I did get it off eBay. Maybe that was why it was sold for £11. Who knows? Let's get on with it. Hi, Emma. I was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer 6 years ago. Just to say, guys, when somebody says terminal, I think what a lot of people do immediately is think, oh, if I've got a terminal prognosis, it means that I'm going to die. What terminal means is that you, as yet, haven't got the option for a cure. So people can have terminal prognosis and they can live a very, very, very long time. So not my real auntie, but you know when we were like in the 80s, everybody was your auntie if they knew your parents. You were like, yeah, that's your Auntie Margaret, that's your Auntie Angela. Well, my Auntie Angela, who wasn't my auntie, but nonetheless was my mum's best friend, she had terminal breast cancer. She did die of it, but 15 years after she was initially diagnosed, and we're going way back now. But a lot of people think when you get a terminal prognosis, it's just like the end of life scenario, and it isn't. So obviously what you're talking about in this question is you're living with cancer as opposed to dying of cancer. So you said scans are coming, which rock the very foundations of a very carefully crafted fortress I've built around myself. Do you have any coping mechanisms for such a thing? We call it scanxiety. Actually, funnily enough, scanxiety is something that's very well noted in the States. So even though you call it scanxiety, it's actually defined in many ways. A lot of oncologists in the States talk about that very thing, that their patients undoubtedly have that rising in fear as they come to deal with a new scan. Please keep it anonymous. Thank you, I will keep you anonymous, don't worry about it. So I think, first of all, when we think about anxiety, there are some logical questions that we ask people. So one is it a realistic fear? And actually, we can't say yours isn't a realistic fear. And I think that's important because sometimes you can say to yourself with anxiety, well, am I blowing this out of proportion? And I don't think you are when you're dealing with something like this. Actually, you've gone through 6 years of getting through a very challenging time and living with cancer and always feeling that there is just this potential cloud that exists in your world, no matter how sunny and beautiful and blue those skies are that you can create in that fortress that you're talking about, there's always going to be a dark cloud somewhere without a doubt, right? Because it's normal to have that fear, and it sounds like you're doing a really good job of keeping that cloud in check. But that question, is this realistic? The answer is yes. Is it logical to have these feelings? Absolutely it is. And I'll tell you why. Because part of it is preparedness. Part of what you're doing is actually starting to work through those feelings that most of the time you can place on a shelf, on that cancer scan shelf, where you put it away until the next time. And then, of course, what's happening is you've got to get that out and realise that you're going to have to face and confront all those feelings that you've carefully stored in a place that hasn't interfered with your life too much. So it's logical as well. And so we can't get rid of the entire scanxiety because it would be impossible, and it would mean you didn't really care about the results, right? So on a reframing level, your anxiety isn't necessarily anxiety about the result and prognosis being bad. It's an anxiety about not living the amazing life you're living. So it's a real recognition and reflection that your life has great meaning. And in these moments where you're questioning your mortality and you're being faced and confronted by things that might not always go well, you're reminding yourself of just how much you want this to continue, how much you want your life to continue, because it's such a solid, good place to be. So take those really important positives and reframe them in that respect. You're living your best life, clearly. You're doing what you need to do to get the most out of your days, and probably more so than the rest of us who haven't confronted our own sense of mortality, because until you get that, you can't really respond and understand just how much you value your life. So again, it's logical, it's realistic, but how best can you manage it? Because like I said, we can't get rid of it. And actually, we don't want to get rid of it, but part of what you're dealing with in those moments is this assertion that your life is really valuable and that the people who love you feel that your life is really valuable. If we diminish that to a point where it's not something that has meaning to you, then we diminish the value of your life, and that's impossible to do. So it's more about, well, having known those factors, accepting that we are being logical, we are being realistic, these are real feelings and fears that are normal to anticipate and experience. How do we, in the moment, deal with it in a way that doesn't cause too much additional stress? Because of course, when you've got cancer, stress, coping and disease is powerful to be aware of. Stress is something we want to reduce as much as possible, and that will obviously help with the coping process, which will then obviously help with the disease process and the keeping that disease under control. And that's the second thing that I taught you about. Often when I've worked with people, and I had the good grace to work many years ago in a placement when I was training in palliative care, where people were actually going through the process of actually coming to terms with the fact that they weren't going to make it in the long term. And whilst we're not talking about that with you, what I learned from those individuals was a really powerful lesson. And it was a sense of really connecting with the fact that even though you can't deal with the bigger picture, it's overwhelming to deal with the bigger picture, you can deal with what impacts on the disease itself, which is to acknowledge that firstly, you have some quality coping strategies that are available to you to actually reduce those stress and anxieties and to actually get the most out of the day-to-day experience. So first of all, I go on about mindful practice, but I think when it comes down to cancer and dealing with scans, mindful practice is really helpful because it does two things. One, you can practice body scan. You can go online and get a free stream of this. Honestly, there's no point paying anybody for it because it's available online. But body scan is all about checking in with your body, attending to the present, being fully aware of what's going on with you and for you. And it's a way of tuning in and checking in with your body. Secondly, bringing yourself back to the present. So distraction is obviously something that you can always do. Of course, people can distract themselves. I often say when people are having panic attacks, pick up a cup and think of 100 different uses for it because I'm going to break their cognition. I don't think it's as easy when you're dealing with something like scanxiety. I think it's more about being mindful and bringing yourself back to the attention of the present. And that can be something as simple as going and sitting outside and just really tuning in. So like allowing those thoughts and fears to kind of come into your head and go out of your head, but just not holding on to them, and instead just like allowing yourself to go, right, well, in 10 minutes, I'm just going to really concentrate on the elements around me, the way that the wind feels in my hair, the birds singing in the distance, the sunlight on my face, and just really connect with that. Because again, it's mindful practice, it calms you down, it brings your attention to the present, and you control the present and that only. That's another layer that I would always bring in as well. Like, cancer can rob you of a lot of things. Like, it can rob you of your feeling of peace at times, and it can rob you of your certainty that none of us really have, but we like to believe that we have. But when you bring it back to the present, in this moment, you are healthy, you are happy, and your life is good. Like, you can't tell what's going to happen next. None of us can. You can have terminal cancer in another 10 years. You could be asking a similar question about a similar thing that you're still dealing with, because treatments are changing, longevity is so much more assured in these circumstances, and healing is possible as well. All of those things exist. But the present is now, it's in this moment. So it's bringing it back to that and thinking, you know what is it that I've really connected with today? What is my gratitude plan? Because it sounds like the people in your life have a lot to be grateful for, and that you have a lot to be grateful for too, in the fact that your body, in spite of this diagnosis, has managed to keep going and persevering. I mean, that's amazing. And it says to me that you do a lot of work on the self. So again, instead of giving that power away and thinking about the scan being the big beyond, that's it, it's going to give you the answer. That isn't the case. You are the person containing yourself. You are the person doing the work. You are the person looking after your body. Those results aren't being given to you by surprise. They're being given to you because you're working a plan. So again, the other thing that I do is, as you come to those positions where you're thinking to yourself, I really want to carry on as long as forever as I can, you know, whether I'm another 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, because you don't know. There are so many things changing, and you're obviously working really hard at health. Also think about what you can do more health-wise. So there are so many treatments that you might not even have considered, from aromatherapy to reflexology to dealing with things that you haven't even considered or contemplated, that could aid your situation, both on a general level now and on a long-term level, as well as reducing things like anxiety. So arguably, I would look at this being an empowering state. When you get that kind of anxiety, it's like, okay, this feels scary, it's logical. What else can I do to make every single day that I live feel like I've grabbed it with both hands and I've used as much opportunity to soothe my situation as possible? Because like I said, you're never going to get past that feeling of being nervous, but you can do a lot to reduce the stress that you carry on a day-to-day level. That means that when those results have to be given to you, you feel more prepared, more connected, and more able to use your toolkit to just reduce some of those difficult feelings. I know that everybody listening to me today will be sending you loads of healing vibes, and it would be really nice if you could just get back in touch and say, everything's been okay and I've got my results and we're A-okay and carrying on, because we'll all be thinking about you. And also just to recognise that at the moment, hospitals feel quite foreign. I'm hearing a lot of people talking about how difficult it is because of all these COVID restrictions and all the measures, that it can be quite an alienating place. So just to also acknowledge that you might feel a little bit of an exacerbation of anxiety anyway because of that, and just to make peace with that before you go. It's not your fault and it's a normal feeling, and just to recognise a lot of people are reflecting it. What are some tips you have for dealing with borderline personality disorder and its constant roller coaster of emotions? I feel like I'm never okay. I mean, that would take more than an hour if I'm completely honest, but borderline personality disorder, what would we say that's characterised by? Well, one of the things is that it's often trauma-based. So when we start talking about dealing with BPD, arguably the first question is, does that fit with you? Is there part of your story, particularly as a young person, a child, where you've been traumatised? Because if a child is traumatised, if a young person is traumatised, you just don't have the tools and the capacity and the opportunity to control your life in a way that you would wish to. So let's take, for example, sexual abuse. So somebody who's sexually abused as a child, they know that something is happening and it doesn't feel good. Even if it feels physically reinforcing, it doesn't feel psychologically good. And so the child is desperate to control the situation, but often doesn't have a place to go with those unmanageable feelings, and doesn't feel that the world around them is offering them a sense of protection that they deserve. By the time they get to a position where they realize exactly what's happened, let's say they might be in adolescence, they might even be in young adulthood, sometimes even in adulthood, but you suddenly have this reckoning that, oh my God, I'm actually a victim of sexual abuse. The person who dealt with the onset of that was not able to form the correct level of emotional response to manage it accurately and effectively because they were a child. But as an adult, understandably, when you started to regulate those unmanageable feelings, you only had the vocabulary that you had as a child. And often those feelings are deeply emotionally varied and massive, massive paradigm of this kind of extreme. So just helplessness, anger, we don't have the nuances as children that we do when we're older. You see that, you'll see a toddler who is exhausted, just like losing their shit entirely and just throwing things in Tesco and just lying on the floor and screaming. They haven't got the nuances. You can't do that when you're 25, can you? It just won't go down very well with the security in the shop. But that's what I'm saying. You learn to regulate your feelings. So let's say you've got a trauma response, then the best thing to do is to start working that through in therapy, without a doubt. Things like schema therapy is really effective. EMDR may be really helpful, but an opportunity to start de-traumatizing yourself from, I suppose, the origins, like the nucleus of where that began. So as an adult, taking that example, remember, if you couldn't protect yourself as a child because you were a child, if you didn't have the variables around you that made your world safe because it was unsafe, then when you get put in a position of threat, then you are gonna react really severely, because as an adult, you're like, you come near me, there's going to be a really negative result. That's how you're going to be. You're going to be on high alert. You're going to be like a coiled spring. And then if anybody dares to get close to you in a way that makes you feel threatened, well, then you can primarily attack them. I don't mean physically, I mean attack them, reject them, abandon them, do all the things that make you feel safe. Equally, if your primary caregivers didn't make you feel loved and cared for because of the situation, then attachment issues and abandonment issues will be huge for you. And again, you were a kid and you're like, it really hurt. It really hurts. It feels really unsafe to get close to people. So then you might create this self-sabotage where when anybody gets close to you, you'll set these levels that they have to achieve and attain if they are going to remain in your life, and they'll be completely inconceivably difficult to do that. It'll be like, you looked at me the wrong way, right, it's over. So in relationships with BPD people, we'll often get these like complete instability when it comes down to maintaining relationships. It's not because you don't want them, it's because you just set these boundaries that are so unbelievably difficult for people to achieve, and you get really angry when they fail to achieve them, because at the end of the day, you're just desperate to never be abandoned, you're desperate to never get lost in that feeling again. So all of these can be really problematic, but the most important thing is to start identifying them. I mean, I don't think a lot of people do that with BPD, but I've always found that really helpful. And I've had some amazing clients who are BPD, like amazing. And it's not an easy area to work with because you little blinders can sometimes be very challenging in the way that you kind of respond and don't come, for example. All these little things that can create that attachment and abandonment cycle, such as not coming to your therapy session, But once you get a hold of that and sit down and do some strategic work with people, getting them to think about like, what is it that causes the biggest problem in my life? Is it when I scream and shout at my partner? By the way, guys, I'm stereotyping. There'll be some of you who are BPD who don't ever get like this. You might actually internalize everything and become very introverted and quiet. Just go with me on the stereotyping though, because it tends to be helpful to actually think about the mass rather than the minimum. But when you get to that situation where you kind of find yourself in a position where your reactions are causing a consequence that you don't want, then there's some real insight there. If you can look at a list of your behaviours that give you a result that you don't like, then your insight's there. That's the bridge. So, I want a partner response. Oh, whenever I get a partner, I get really angry with them when they fail to understand that I'm struggling emotionally, and I kick them out. And now I feel sad and lonely. Well, we've got our insight there. So what we need to break is a chain of causation between the way I feel and the way I approach expressing that feeling. and the consequence that I give the partner for failing to help me identify the feeling and soothe the feeling. By working that through, you can start creating like a toolkit of strategy. And the same as whenever I get near a relationship and I start feeling like I'm falling in love, I have sex with a stranger. That's another example. And that spontaneity that is seemingly spontaneous and doesn't make sense, when you think about it on a sabotage level, makes perfect sense. All right, I was falling in love. Love makes me feel unsafe because people abandon me. I have sex with a stranger, solves the problem. Now that person's going to reject me. I end up abandoned and rejected, the one thing I'm trying to avoid, but arguably at least I control the rejection. And so working those kind of cycles through can be really, really empowering. Also, anything that relaxes you, anything that kind of brings you down. You know, if whenever you feel completely distressed, you get hysterical, well, that's not answering the distress. Distress causes for soothing. So if you don't get the soothing, you're just going to feel in this hyper arousal state of distress. So when you feel it coming on, and don't get me wrong, people will say, and I've had it said to me before, but I can't control it. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Unless you happen to have some really serious prefrontal cortex damage or orbital cortex damage in your brain, which you haven't, you can control it. You don't choose to control it because it's unmanageable. So you say, well, it's unmanageable, I have no control. Yes, you do. You're just choosing to be out of control to control it, and it's not effective. So it's in feeling those physical changes and experiencing those, and then saying, oh, hang on, I know what happens now because my toolkit says whenever I get like this, I kick off with my partner and I end up doing something that's regretful, or I end up alienating a friend. You create the map of causation, and then you dissect that map and create strategies that will effectively soothe that response and reaction. The best place to do it is therapy. And you can get EMDR on the National Health, and you'll go to a specialised clinical psychologist who are not just trained in clinical psychology, they'll also be trained in EMDR. You can also go privately to a MBA CP accredited therapist who will be EMDR trained. You tend to have to pay for that one. If you can afford to go for therapy and you can pay for it, it is worth the investment. It really is. If you can't, then looking at borderline personality support groups, you will find those, that there are BPD groups locally, you know, little meetups, people who understand that situation and can offer some kind of peer-led group. That would also be really helpful. But I mean, I think because most of it is trauma-based, anything that you can get therapy with would be really helpful. Don't for 1 minute think you have to have EMDR either. You can just get a regular therapist to work with you, because even the stuff I've said, if you were to do CBT with somebody that you can get free on the NHS, it would still help you, because you're going to be thinking about actions, behaviours and consequences, and you're going to be figuring out how to work with your cognitions, the way that you think, in a way that blocks or changes the way that you respond and react to a certain stimulus, such as your partner or the guy that you like or the girl that you like looking at you in a certain way, and you psychically interpreting that the reason they're looking at you that way is because they don't want to be with you. That's a psychic interpretation, and it's a really bad cycle to go down because usually it's inaccurate. So in that circumstance, you can work through that in therapy, because what would actually happen is somebody looked at you that way and you then felt, oh, I need to get into a row with this person to reject them, to avoid them telling me something I don't want to know. You would be taught to just stop, to just do a thought stopping process where you're like, actually, I can't control them. I'm going to let them be who they are. And if they need to tell me something, well, I'll deal with that then. So you get rid of that reactionary base, and chances are they're not going to say that to you, which will then reinforce that the method that you used to use to approach these circumstances is outmoded and doesn't make sense. And then you can start creating a new way of coping, which is, actually, I will learn to trust that when somebody needs to tell me something that I need to know, they're going to do it. It's amazing how many people, whether you've got BPD or otherwise, who do this psychic ideas of what another person is thinking without actually just letting the relationship play out. It's like, what are they thinking? I'm going to ask them what they're thinking. When the person says they're not thinking anything, I'm going to read into it that they are reading into something. And then I'm going to cause an argument because they're not actually acknowledging that I know that they know something that they're not telling me. Like, literally, that's how it works. And don't deny it. I know there's a lot of you at home now going, oh, it is how it works. It is how it works. I've watched it a lot. Exactly the same as, like, no disrespect to women out there, and it won't be all women, yeah? But I'm going to let you into a secret, and this is for the men out there listening as well. When men argue, and this is something that I have picked up through many, many years of working. This isn't just me anecdotally throwing it out there. I guarantee if there are other therapists listening or psychologists listening, or actually just human beings who've ever been in a relationship, this is a problem in relationships. Forget just the psychic connection processing where we believe that we know what's going on in somebody's head when they don't even know it's going on in their head. And then we're going to argue with them until they admit that the thing that we think they're thinking is the thing that they're actually thinking, even though now they're just confused and just agreeing with us because they don't want it to stop. Just let it stop. It's as simple as that. But this is another thing, and this is the gender difference and disparity. Men, when they have an argument with respect to men, on the whole, they'll be like, this is the problem. We're arguing about this problem. And it may be something like, I feel upset that, I don't know, you broke my power tool. Probably an unlikely example, but go with me on this. Whereas a female will be like, that power tool isn't the issue. It was the issue, but now I'm going to chronologically throw at you every argument that we've ever had since the onset of our relationship in order. And then at the end of it, I'm going to make that power tool actually an issue with the fact that you've never respected my mother, and I've actually found you quite an abandoning issue when it comes down to my emotional experience. Literally, that's what women can do. And at that point, a man will just concede that he did indeed say something nasty to her mother 23 years ago. Just saying, it's really important when we learn about the way we operate to kind of acknowledge that sometimes it's not really about what we think it's about, and it's about a wider issue. Men often do feel blindsided by a woman's uncanny ability to remember every single argument ever from the onset to this moment. Sometimes we know things in the future. That's how good we are at arguing. We can actually get to this point and then say, and just list things that are going to happen at some point in the future and blame them for that as well. Stereotyping, I know, but don't deny that you're nodding. I'm watching you. How can you help someone with psychosis? How can they overcome it, can they? So I have a lived experience of psychosis. My father, unfortunately, suffered from serious psychosis, and many of you know how that ended. And I've also learned a great deal from the experience, and I have worked with people in the past who've experienced psychosis. But there are different thoughts and theories about psychosis and what you should do to treat them. So I remember when Dad got sick, I kind of went straight for that. How do I solve a problem? And I think that looking back, that was probably the worst approach that I could have placed in that situation. So I just wanted it to stop. And for those of you who don't know what psychosis is, imagine feeling really paranoid, sometimes very suspicious. Sometimes you can hallucinate. Actually, you can see things that aren't there. You can hear things that aren't there. You can smell things that aren't there. It can be so palpable and so real that it genuinely is as if somebody is sat in the chair next to you. It's not like a dream state. So a lot of people will say that it's like a dream state. It isn't. Like it's visceral and cerebral, and it's very, very real. So for people who are experiencing psychosis, when they're telling you that they think that you're spending all their money, and to you it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever, for them it's very, very real. And so the first part of psychosis is do not try to tell the person experiencing it that it isn't happening. It's a bit like saying to somebody who's holding a cup of tea in their hands, you're not holding a cup of tea in your hands, it's empty. It's like, it's unimaginable for that person because they're holding the cup of tea in their hands. So the most important thing is don't do what a lot of people will try to tell you to do, which is to argue with the person the fact that they are incorrect. Because perception is reality, and what they are perceiving is absolutely real, beginning, middle and end. So having noted that, what can you do when they're in that situation? Well, first of all, you can offer them reassurance. So even though it didn't end well for my father, and there's a whole lot of other reasons that I don't really talk about that led to my father killing himself, I don't think that the psychosis alone was it. I think there were other contributing factors. So to explore what I did when I was kind of talking to him, and it worked very, very well. And I was probably the one in my family that did it the most, and I think did it the best as far as reasoning in a way that led him to feel safe. So as opposed to kind of challenging him, which a lot of people wanted to do, I wouldn't challenge him. When he was saying that my mother was stealing all his money, or that he was, in trouble with the police because he'd done A, B, or C, I would reassure him by saying things like, that must be really difficult for you. That must be really scary. Tell me how scary that is for you. And it was a way of creating no battle, and it built confidence with him. So if you know somebody who's dealing with psychosis, one of the most important key things is to do that. If it's you who's dealing with psychosis, then it's important to help your family around you build that repertoire so they know how to handle you during those situations. Next, we have the medication issue. Some people work really well with antipsychotics. I mean, often what they'll do is they'll give you an antidepressant, an antipsychotic, and an anti-anxiety. Anti-anxiety tablets tend to be really effective in dumbing down the actual feeling of hyperarousal and anxiety, but obviously they're highly addictive and can create a rebound effect that make it very unenviable when they come off them. So even though it kind of subdues them in the moment, it can be deeply distressing when they start coming off them. The antipsychotics, some people it works effectively with, some people it doesn't work at all. So it should be dealt with on a person-to-person basis, dependent on what they want. Antidepressants also, for some people work and for some people don't. So when you think about the medication route, it's how does this affect the person when they're on them? Do they respond well? Do they not like them? Are the physical symptoms that they get negative when it comes down to the adverse impact of those tablets? Or do they seem in a better state, in which case it's probably worth continuing it? If they are continuing taking medication, but then they become suspicious of that, but it seems to have a really positive impact on them, you can always speak to your primary care and ask them to give them injections, because you can have injections as opposed to having to take tablets, because a lot of people with psychosis, they feel that they're being poisoned, they're suspicious about treatments, so anything that can minimize that experience can also be really, really helpful. But for those people who don't ever want to touch medication, psychosis can definitely be treated. It can definitely be something that people recover from, and most importantly, it can be dealt with more effectively on the whole, research says, at home. So this idea that people need to be put in hospital is not what the research evidence is. In fact, what tends to be the case is that the more you can create a community-led operation around support, the better it will be for everybody. And arguably, anything that can reduce stress is going to be helpful. So exercise, really looking after their diet, helping them to feel empowered in their environment as well, so not feeling like everybody else is controlling it. These are all stepping stones in helping somebody to deal with psychosis. But it begins, middles and ends for me at the beginning when you start to communicate in a way that doesn't try to distort their experience and instead lends itself to not colluding with it and being like, oh yeah, she is trying to steal all your money, but more of a, that must be really difficult. Tell me about how that feels, and I'm here for you. You want to create an alliance and allegiance with that person. That's the starting point as far as I'm concerned. And then the more you can equip yourself, the better. Like, learn about it and look at new treatments for it. And don't be afraid to speak to other people who've been in similar situations. Go on forums, speak to people who've been there, because often there are lots of juicy pieces of information that you will never get told by psychiatrists, psychologists, or the NHS. So always look further afield. It's as simple as that. If there's one thing that I've learned from going through this with my dad, it's that, yeah, I would never listen to the apparent professionals that I listened to back then, ever. Hi Emma, I hope you're well. Thank you very much. I am deeply frustrated, a little bit annoyed with the way things currently are, and I have a lot of receipts to throw at people in the next 10 years. But apart from that, I'm fine. I hope this doesn't seem stupid. A lot of people say that to me when they write to me. Nothing sounds stupid. I was raped, at least certainly not when you're talking about rape. I was raped at the age of 15. I am now 25 years old. I have feelings for this person, but can't understand why I do, as I know what he did was wrong and shouldn't have happened. Any advice, please? Okay. So, first of all, I don't know what the relationship is with the person. So I don't know whether you're talking about at 25, you have romantic feelings for a person who raped you when you're 15, or whether you were 25 now and at 15 you were raped by somebody who's within your familial network, for example, that you genuinely have loving feelings for, because that can be a completely normal experience. So I guess that I'm going to have to try to approach it as a whole, but also noting there are some distinguishing factors there. So first of all, you are not the issue here, right? So even if you have feelings for this person, even if they're confusing, even if you feel sexually attracted to them, it's not on you, any of this. So you are a victim, beginning, middle, and end. You were raped, beginning, middle, and end. So whatever you feel, confusing as it may be, is completely okay, because you didn't cause any of this, right? Also, think of it like this. Sexual experiences are deeply powerful. Now, they can be disconcerting, shame-provoking, deeply alienating body-wise at times, but they also feel a certain way. And the idea that when people are being raped, they're just violently violated is a massive myth. Unfortunately, some people do experience rape that way. But for those who are coerced, manipulated, made to feel special, and then raped, well, it's deeply confusing, because it's not the black and white situation I just talked about a moment ago, where it's clearly highly inappropriate and violent, and therefore something that everybody can kind of look into and go, yeah, wow, that was just the most diabolical rape ever. When it becomes more of a coerced experience, where you're like, do I like this person? Does this feel good? Well, one, your body sexually feels good when it's touched. Like, there is nothing more deeply confusing than finding something pleasurable that you think is also wrong. I mean, that's literally a juxtaposition. It feels really good, and it's really bad. You know, how do you hold that cognitive dissonance in the same moment? It's really difficult and painful. And then imagine that you don't want to be a victim. You don't want to think you were raped. You don't want to imagine for a moment that you went through this situation that you had no control and no power over. And so there are two ways of dealing it. One, I can say, well, yeah, I'm a real victim of rape, and I can then have the onslaught of feeling powerlessness and helplessness and the agony of knowing that I had no control. And in doing that, I liberate myself by acknowledging that I truly am a victim and that that person is wrong. Or I can say, well, maybe I don't want to think that I had no control. Maybe I don't want to believe that this person violated me. Maybe it's easier to imagine that it wasn't really that bad. Hey, maybe I even enjoyed it. And then I've got control, right? I'm not the victim anymore. But that confuses the state again. So then we're on the, well, if it wasn't really that bad, maybe this person isn't really a predator. If this person isn't really a predator, maybe it was just that I was 15. And if I'd been 16, would it have been so bad? And can you see how you negotiate a new state because you just don't want to acknowledge that you were a victim? And so both have their issues. But over here, when you say I'm a victim, there's a purism to that experience. You're like, actually, I was violated. That person is a predator. There are consequences that they need to confront and face, and it's not on me. Like, if I go to the police, if I tell people about this, there is a chain of causation that they have created, and it's not on me, it's on them. And even though you might have confusing feelings, it's still a very clear position. This one is much more murky and difficult. It says, well, it wasn't really that bad, and maybe I'm the bad person because I kind of like have these feelings for this person now, and maybe really I want this relationship, and so on and so forth. That desire to control amplifies to a point and position where actually you start being the prisoner in a carefully crafted narrative that you've created to try to prevent yourself feeling that you are helpless. I know that doesn't answer the question, but it comes down to one thing, and that is you are fully the victim in this circumstance. The way that you feel positive or negative is irrelevant. They committed a crime. The bigger question is, knowing that this person committed a crime, what action do you feel that you wish to take? Because you have recourse, you have an option here to actually do something that would mean that that person had their actions correctly called into question and potentially prosecuted. Like I said, it's not unusual to have confused and conflicting feelings about what happens when you're not violently raped, when it's more coercive. But with respect, you are fully a victim no matter whether you went to bed with that person believing that they were somebody that they actually weren't, and not realising that you were a child and therefore not able to consent. It's all irrelevant. It comes down to one thing: you are an absolute victim, and owning that can be very, very challenging and very painful, because we always want to believe that we have some level of control. And like I said, the sexual stuff is really conflicting. It's why it's so good to have some therapeutic work done, to actually work with somebody who specialises in things like sexual assault, because of the fact that it is really confusing. You can have these really evocative physical sensations and thoughts and feelings about an individual that harmed you because of the pleasure sensations that your body goes through. And like I said, it's one of the big problems that we work with when people have got this like shame cycle because it felt good. They think that they must be bad, and it's quite the contrary. It's just physical reactions. The emotional is far more difficult to deal with. I get attached to people. My teacher was my favourite person and helped me so much, but she left on maternity leave. I'm struggling to cope without her. Well, first of all, having really positive feelings for people like teachers is not a bad thing. It means that people have great worth to you. But you note and recognise that maybe you get a little bit too invested, and then that causes a bit of a grief process. Some people have got a more sensitive nature. Not everyone's born with an ability to just kind of like get on with it when people leave. You know, my son and me were having a chat the other day because his girlfriend, my son's 19, and his girlfriend and him have not gone to university this year, but she's decided that she's going to go to university this coming September. And there's that real emotional recognition of that overwhelming sense of change. And like human beings, we like a status quo. Like, we're habit forming. We all know that security is a myth and that things can change in an instant, but we don't build our lives that way. We kind of get used to a rhythm. It's just what we do. It makes getting up in the morning less scary than it would if we just didn't know what was going to happen. We plan and we present this idea that there are details in our lives that we can rely on. And then all of a sudden that shifts, and it's kind of a shocking experience for some people. Others, it's kind of a mild disturbance. But for some people who really care and crave security, it can feel enormous. And if you've had issues around abandonment, maybe you haven't had the best primary caregivers, you've been made to feel that when you get attention, it has more importance and value because maybe you didn't get it when you deserved it when you were younger. And so this teacher represents not just the security of your experience when you're at college or at school. This person represents something more, something of compassion, connection, security, attachment, giving you a sense of self-worth. And when you don't expect a lot from people and they go that little extra mile, it makes you really connect with them. So the message there is, okay, what is it in my past, in my life, that means that I didn't get what I deserved? And this teacher isn't going to be giving you a huge amount. Look, you might feel they are. Maybe they smile at you in the right places. They remind you that you've got worth. They tell you you're good at what you do. But this teacher can't do very much more than that. Hey, they might be able to spend a little bit more time with you at the end of class. They might chat to you about your day. But let's be honest, these are scraps where real relationships are concerned. And I'm not underestimating or underplaying the value of that teacher. I think I was saved because of one or two teachers when I was growing up. Believe me, I appreciate that impact. But you know, I'm not looking at my old English teacher and thinking, yeah, she was definitely somebody that changed my life because she spent huge amounts of inordinate amounts of time with me. She didn't. You know, she gave me scraps, but they were important scraps. Same here with you. The bigger message is, why do those scraps have so much meaning? And it tends to be that it's because we don't have the fundamental foundations of great relationships that we need to create in our lives and strive to have. They're not there. We didn't get them as kids. We haven't had enough of them with our peers. And the message is, well, hang on. You take great pleasure in these tiny scraps that you're given by this teacher. Like, your expectations for great relationships is pretty low. Yeah, we need to hire them a little bit, but wow, it's not going to be hard for you to have good relationships with other people because your expectations aren't that huge. And that's not a good thing on one level, but on another level, it means that the kind of relationships that are available to you are vast. People are literally going to be able to meet a bar, and we need to hire it a little bit. We need to get it to a point where you realize that you deserve more than just scraps. But essentially, that's the message in this. It's like, you need to get good friends. You need to think about wider relationships. You need to create opportunities to socialize. You need to do things that make you feel that you have foundations in the relationships that you absolutely deserve and have potentially missed out on. But that's why you have these feelings, because she's given you a little bit of attention and she's left you now and you feel a bit abandoned. But it was not that she was giving you this enormous amount. It's that you've come to expect so little, that bit extra that she gave you than other people felt profound. Well, you can get profound relationships when you start acknowledging what you want, what you deserve, and then start reaching into that. And that might be accepting that you need to go and join some meetup groups and find common groups that reflect your interest bases. Go places where you take risks. Do things with who you are to grow your courage. Because like I said, there are millions of people who are desperately looking for great friends and partners, and people like you will make them. So the grief process of her loss is more the grief process that you are dealing with because of your own lack of attachment and reflections of good relationships that you should have had but maybe didn't get opportunity to experience because of, like I said, them not being available to you when you were growing up. Is there any help you can give me regarding actually being able to sleep? I suffer from mental health issues. I'm lucky if I'm even getting 2 hours sleep a night. So I always say this. First of all, if you are genuinely an insomniac of that level, it is well worth going to the doctors and just getting everything checked out, because I'm going to say some things that I believe and that might be helpful. But certainly I always think if you're dealing with real high insomnia, probably linked to things like anxiety, it might still be worth getting your bloods done. Just an overall 360 look at what's going on for you, because I don't know, you might be dealing with a medication issue that you're on, and that might be interfering with your sleep as well. And they're things that I definitely can't involve myself in, because obviously I don't prescribe and so on and so forth. But let's put all of that to the side. Let's imagine that that's what you're going to go and do. So we've got that kind of ticked. There is some evidence that's come out that says that if you take a really hot bath, and I'm talking about a bath that makes it go, ow, you know, when you're standing in there and you're having to ease yourself in. We've all done that. Ease yourself in as you go pinker and pinker and pinker. But you stay in that bath really hot for about 30 minutes. Put some aromatherapy oils in there. Play some nice music. You want some nice music? Try Einaudi, the Islands album. Ludovico Einaudi. I defy anyone not to enjoy that. Or Riopi is another great pianist. Faye McGow. These are all people that you can just look up on Spotify or Apple if you've got the app and you've got the music that they do. These are all things that can really help, because what we know about particularly beautiful contemporary pianist music is the way our brain waves are affected. It kind of genuinely changes the state of flow in our brain. So you get into a really hot bath for about 30 minutes, and then you get out of that bath, you dry yourself off, and you make sure that you've not got wait 2 hours to go to bed after it. And the cooling of the body seems to relax it in a way that makes sleep much more possible. Second, put your phone away. I say it to everybody. I say it to myself as well, and I don't even listen to myself a lot of the time. But certainly, if I was struggling with sleep, and I have done in the past, one of the things that has to go is any TV and any phone activity, anything with lights, any blue light, white light. I just want it all off, right? So get rid of it for 2 hours. So when you do your bath and you get out, you switch off everything. I don't want any screens at all. Get a book, and I want you to read. And I want you to really read. I don't want you to sit there for 10 minutes and be like, oh, I'm exhausted. No, I want you to read, because I'm going to tire your brain out. So now we've got the deep cooling of the body, which helps to really help with sleep. We've got the blue and white light cut out. We've got no electrical stimulation because we've got rid of it for at least 2 hours before sleep. Then we're introducing a book. And that book is going to help our brain to just kind of tire itself out. And then I'm not going to go to bed until I feel like I'm going to nod off. That's the way to approach sleep. And if you're only getting 2 hours now, maybe you'll get 4 hours. But the point is, if you apply those techniques, it will really help. The other thing I always swear by, not everybody enjoys this, I swear by it, I do not go to bed without white noise. So I usually play, you can get this online for free. It's usually rain sounds or storm sounds are what I like. I like that kind of like a howling of the wind and the storms and the rain batting down. For me, that is something that I always go to sleep with, and you can get 10 hours of that online. Like I said, you're not allowed to look at your technology until you are setting up that before you go to bed. No peeping apart from that. They're all things that are really helpful. But like I said, before you do that, I'd go and get a full inventory by your doctor and just check out the medications. And that isn't me saying go to your doctor, check out the medications and get yourself on Zopiclone, for example. I don't believe in that. I don't think that sleep medications are really effective on the whole. I think they kind of temporarily downplay the issues that you're dealing with. It's far better to get your physiological self put back in check. Another thing that might help as well is getting outside for at least 90 minutes a day in white light. We know that affects your melatonin levels. You secrete too much when you are in situations where there's a lot of darkness around you, which we've had for the last few months and we will be doing until we get into spring. So getting out for a walk for 90 minutes will really, really help you. And again, always eating and drinking and what you put in your body is really powerful. So exercise, etc., etc. All of those things will help. And you should approach physical health and mental health the same way. If you're not looking after your physical health, then you're not looking after your mental health. It's as simple as that. So if somebody has got something that is distorted in their physical health, you know, if you're not putting things in your body that are good for you, if you're drinking too much alcohol, we've all done that, certainly through lockdown, I can own that. If we aren't really nurturing ourselves and giving ourselves the nutrition we require, there's work to do. And this is it for everybody. Like, you know, today I've worked, I've gone out for my walk, I've gone to my gym, and don't get me wrong, every moment of that was spent interjected with my hedonistic brain going, you should probably just drink wine, drink wine, right? Battle that every day of the week, because like, that's my brain. My brain's always looking for the how do I self-destruct, you know? It's just some people are born with those kind of brains. So I need to keep that in check. You know, she's only allowed out very occasionally, and even then she's not allowed out as much as she'd like to be. What I'm saying is that most of us know that we've got work to do and don't do it. Most of us acknowledge that we're not looking after our bodies how we're meant to look after them. We're not exercising how we should. And then we say, well, why are things not right for me? Why is my brain not firing in the way I want it to fire? Why am I exhausted? Why am I anxious? Well, why aren't you? That's the best question to ask yourself. Of course I'm anxious. I'm not doing anything that would reduce my anxiety. I'm online 24/7. I'm catastrophizing about the possibilities that could affect my life. I'm not thinking about what I put in my body. I'm not exercising. I'm eating things that are bright orange and I'm drinking things that are bright red. You know, there are all these things that when you're actually really honest with yourself and you analyze what you're doing to yourself, can you really honestly say, I'm doing my best physically and mentally? And if the answer is no, I'm not. I mean, I can answer that on a regular basis and I work really hard. But there are many times I can genuinely say to myself, no, today I haven't done my best by my body and my best by my brain. I haven't done it best by my emotional self. So I'm going to have to work harder. And it's all about working harder. The benefits are amazing. The payoffs are great, but it's working harder. And I think that after 2 years of being decimated by a tyrannical, overreaching government, in my opinion, more than ever, we need to start looking at our own bodily autonomy and saying, are we doing the best we can with our bodies, with our minds? And if you can honestly say yes, then good. And you should therefore use that to help others around you who are not doing, to help them see the same and do the same. And if, like most of us mere mortals, you can say no, then there's work to do. And when you do that work and start to do that work, all the things that feel out of place in your life will feel more in place. And there is nobody ever in my entire experience and career who can tell me something other than that. Because even when I say to people, when they're struggling, and they say, what can I do? And I say, every day, walk for an hour, and then next week come back and tell me you're as sad as you were last week. And people either don't do the walking, so they can't answer the question, or the question is answered with, I feel better than I did last week. Incremental changes, but it takes work, and we all have a lot to do. So I'll leave you tonight on that one. See you on Wednesday for those of you who come to my crime. Like, that sounds like I'm out there, doesn't it? Yeah. Some of you want to come and witness me committing crime. Come on a Wednesday evening, 7:30 or 7. Don't even remember what time it is now. Is it 7? 7. Don't even remember my own itinerary, guys. Don't even remember my own itinerary. Take care, chaps. See you soon.